Hey guys, Adriano P here, and the other day I went to do some research because I wanted to buy RAM for my computer, and oh man, I was stunned because the price was huge, the price was absurd. The RAM I saw last year was around 350 to 400 reais, and now it was 1,200. I was like, what's going on, right? I was shocked by that and went to see what was happening. To have this increase, since price hikes like this aren't new, they're nothing novel and have been around for a while, what then justifies this rise? And I see there that actually all this RAM, hard drives, and SSDs too, right, have extremely inflated prices because of the AI race. Companies are already buying batches that haven't even been manufactured yet just to make sure they'll get them. And I was like, wow, where is this race going to end, right? When is this price going to drop? And I'll tell you that I found out where this race is going to end, and I didn't like the answer, and I don't think you'll like it either. But let's check this out in today's video, and before watching the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it. All that ritual we always do here, right, on YouTube, asking you to share and all that, but with me, it's important for you to do this because YouTube really hides the channel. So, if you don't help me share with everyone, no one will know that Geopolitical Mundial exists, so your support is really important, okay? My name is Drampeta, and this is the Geopolitical Mundial channel, and the artificial intelligence race is literally out of control, and it's no wonder. Its potential involves a civilizational reorganization driven by a structural power struggle, where artificial intelligence is not just a consumer product or a software service, as many economists seem to be saying, but as a new fundamental factor of production and the critical national security infrastructure of countries. And understand that when we talk about national security, it's not just the military aspect as many people think, but everything that makes a nation function. So we're talking about energy, logistics, food production, and infrastructure, as well as the military aspect. The prevailing narrative, once limited to venture capital circles in San Francisco, has moved to national security circles in Washington, Brussels, Beijing, Moscow, and Brasilia is left out of this discussion. If in 2023 the conversation revolved around chatbots e assistentes virtuais para a produtividade, in 2025 this changed and became a strategic focus, shifting to the construction of computing clusters valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, the mobilization of gigawatts of dedicated nuclear power, and the explicit militarization of the semiconductor supply chain. In February 2025 here on the channel, I made a video talking about how to launch the Chinese DeepSeek for free. It was part of China's strategy to disrupt the Western economic advantage in artificial intelligence. And it seemed like the Chinese wanted to turn AIs into a kind of commodity. Well, a year went by, and after that, everything was confirmed. The central thesis of several risk agencies is that intelligence is ceasing to be a human trait. It is becoming diffuse, turning into an industrial commodity refined in artificial intelligence factories, which are the data centers, and distributed via high-latency networks, creating a new positive economy. So, we have three perceptions about this race, and they are interconnected. The strategy, analyzing the rationality or irrationality driven by the strategic panic of nations and corporate sectors. The technical side, detailing the physical bottlenecks of memory, advanced packaging, and energy, which act as strict regulators of progress. And geopolitics, mapping the bifurcation of the world between the ecosystem led by the United States and the China bloc. Everything indicates that we are in a scenario of cognitive bipolarity, where economic interdependence will eventually be replaced by incompatible technology blocks, and where the pursuit of general artificial intelligence, or AGI, acts as a catalyst for an industrial mobilization not seen since World War II, or at least the equivalent of the Manhattan Project, which created the first atomic bomb. Whether this AGI is something realistic to achieve or not is not the point of the video, because the point of the video is that this is the goal. And the success of the first nation would mean the mutual failure of all nations will have impacts on the global economy. So, what I want to discuss in this video is not whether AGI, this general artificial intelligence, will be realistic or not, but the impacts of this race and what will happen if this is possible, or what will happen if this is not possible. The most important transformation in the last 20 years, or even just months, was the radical recalibration of expectations regarding the capacity ceiling of artificial intelligence models. Until the beginning of 2023, there was a certain skepticism about the stagnation of large language models. It was common among conservative academics, but now artificial intelligence enthusiasts and those who have influence in governments claim that there is a possible extrapolation of scaling laws, demonstrating that increasing orders of magnitude in computation, data, and parameters continues to produce increasing returns. And only time will tell if they are wrong, because right now, at this moment, what matters to us is that they have managed to convince governments to inject really a lot of money into this area. The ultimate goal declared by the leading frontier labs such as OpenAI, Anthropic, or Google DeepMind is quietly adopted by national defense apparatuses as being AGI, where a superintelligence would be capable of performing any intellectual task that a human being could execute, but with vastly superior speed, breadth, and scalability. Documents and reports from people inside the industry indicate that the trajectory is preparing infrastructure for systems that, by the end of 2026, will surpass most college graduates in complex reasoning, and before 2030, they may reach superintelligence, defined as systems more intelligent than humanity combined. This short time frame of just 4 to 5 years for a transition from biological to synthetic intelligence compresses decades of social, economic, and regulatory adaptation into a very short period, generating then this immense pressure on the government structures that exist today. And again, whether they are being overly optimistic is not the point, because what matters to us is how their actions, right or wrong, are affecting the global economy and politics. I say this because the magnitude of the investments reflects this expectation. The corporate dialogue has shifted from $10 billion computing clusters to plans for $100 billion computing clusters, and they're already projecting those that will reach $1 trillion. This leap, which is exponential, cannot be justified by incremental improvements in search engines or targeted advertising alone. It's a bet on the creation of a new form of intellectual capital that will surpass previous forms of labor, which I'll emphasize for the 4th or 5th time. Whether it will or not, only time will tell, but it's already impacting government actions. Which brings us to the concept of sovereign AI, popularized by the CEO of NVIDIA, which reflects the nationalization and territorialization of this technological goal. In his view, and this is already something growing in the doctrine of nation-states, each country must have its own capacity to produce its own artificial intelligence using its own infrastructure, its own data, reflecting its culture, language, and values, its own workforce, and its business networks. This could signal the end of the open global internet era and the start of territorial intelligence. Sovereign processing capability is now seen as something as critical as food and energy security, or the integrity of physical borders. Nations that do not develop their own computational sovereignty will become cognitive vassals, dependent on black box models hosted in foreign jurisdictions where ethical and political alignments may be opposed to local interests. And it will be useless for the local parliament to make laws or for local judges to issue rulings, because we are talking about domination at a cognitive and civilizational level. We already have 3 examples of this, like in Denmark, which launched an artificial intelligence supercomputer partly funded by the profits of Novo Nordisk, the company doesn't peak, aiming to encode Danish culture and accelerate national pharmaceutical research, thus avoiding dependence on Anglophone models. That is, models from the United States. The United Arab Emirates, through the Falcon model and massive investment in local infrastructure, seek to transition from an energy powerhouse to a global IT hub. In IT, controlling their own models to ensure alignment with local values and security over their own data. And also in Singapore, which is implementing strategies to lift data center moratoriums to ensure that the city-state remains a sovereign processing hub in Southeast Asia. In the United States, the prevailing strategy has been to delegate innovation to the private sector, while the government tries to build regulatory systems and national security mechanisms. However, analysts predict that as we approach AGI, which they believe will happen between 2027 and 2029, maybe at the latest by 2032, and I repeat, they are the ones who believe this public-private distinction will collapse. Some predict the beginning of what is called the project, which would be a total industrial and national security mobilization, where artificial intelligence labs will be effectively integrated into the state security apparatus, protected by military secrecy and guarded by the armed forces, because of the high strategic value of superintelligence. In China, the civil-military fusion was already a clear doctrinal reality. The goal is not just economic efficiency, but the intelligentization of war and social control. The prevailing fear in the United States is not just that China will gain an economic advantage, but that it will gain one, a thinking weapon capable of breaking cryptographic codes, designing bioweapons, or conducting autonomous cyber wars with superhuman effectiveness, thus upsetting global deterrence. Digital intelligence, although ethereal and light in its application, is brutally physical and resource-intensive to produce. The artificial intelligence race runs into three physical walls in 2025 that do not bend to software's flexibility. The first is the shortage of high-bandwidth memory, the second is the extreme complexity of chip packaging, and the third is the thermodynamics of energy. The most immediate and severe bottleneck for scaling artificial intelligence models is not just processing capacity, but memory bandwidth. The architecture of models like ChatGPT requires that enormous amounts of parameters be moved to the processing cores instantly. Here, high-bandwidth memory technology has become the scarcest resource on the planet. In 2025, the market for these memories was like a rigid and unbalanced oligopoly dominated by the South Korean company SK Hynix. The company holds a projected market share of 62%, supplying almost exclusively the high-end chips for NVIDIA, which consumes about 90% of its production. Samsung, traditionally the world's largest memory manufacturer, then faced a historic setback. Problems they faced in qualifying some of their memory modules with NVIDIA resulted in a humiliating loss of leadership, allowing SK Hynix to capture the pricing and margin gains of the artificial intelligence revolution. This shortage is not a logistical detail, it simply dictates the pace of deploying new training clusters. With the capacity of the main manufacturers already sold out until the end of 2026, new players who want to enter this race, whether they are sovereign nations or corporations outside NVIDIA's inner circle, cannot simply buy their way in with money. They face a physical supply constraint. In other words, those who have joined the race are already in, and those who haven't are simply out. Which is just another one of those wake-up calls for those who think geopolitics is only about money. Beyond memory, there's the advanced packaging bottleneck. Today, TSMC's COUS technology is currently the only viable method on an industrial scale to integrate these modern logic GPUs with memory stacks. This advanced chip market has become an extreme bottleneck, because TSMC from Taiwan is rushing to expand the capacity of this COUS to 150,000 wafers per month by the end of 2026, because demand is much higher than supply. And this is no longer a one-off issue, it's structural. The whole world depends on a single critical process done by a single company that's in Taiwan in a militarily sensitive region, even facing the risk of war. In practice, this has perhaps become the biggest single point of failure in the current global economy. And this bad situation is only not worse because China hasn't decided to attack Taiwan yet. So, pray that they don't attack or lay siege to the island, and the biggest problem is that this capacity is already almost entirely sold out years in advance. NVIDIA, because it has a long-standing and strategic partnership with TSMC, secured most of this space. With that, it gained unprecedented power. It not only controls its own chips, but also the pace of progress for those who depend on them, like Microsoft, Meta, and Google. Whoever doesn't have access to COUS now will simply be left out of the artificial intelligence race for the next few years, maybe even decades. It's not a delay, it's technical exclusion, and we have perhaps the most intractable and physically limiting obstacle, which is energy. AI training clusters are growing exponentially in power demand, jumping from 10 to 20 megawatts, which was the traditional cloud standard, to gigawatt-scale projects. In other words, a single trillion-class cluster planned for the end of the 2020s. It will consume more energy than entire cities or small industrialized countries, requiring transmission infrastructure that doesn't exist in most developed regions. Big tech companies realize that the public power grid is too slow, too bureaucratic, and too heavily regulated to keep up with their development timelines. The interconnection queue in critical regions like Northern Virginia or the PJM interconnection, which serves the mid-Atlantic of the US, stretches for years. This triggered a parallel race for the privatization of baseload power generation, which is specifically nuclear energy. Meta itself announced agreements to secure 6 gigawatts of nuclear energy by 2035, including partnerships with small modular reactor developers. Amazon bought data centers directly connected to existing nuclear plants in Pennsylvania to bypass these transmission bottlenecks. And with that, this voracious demand from data centers has even started to impact residential rates. In the grid region I mentioned in Northern Virginia, electricity capacity prices have skyrocketed, with rate increases of up to 20% in 2025, partly because of the pressure from data center demand. This shifts the cost of the artificial intelligence race to the average citizen, which generates a political reaction. Energy, which has always been one of the sources of problems in geopolitics, is now also a source of geopolitical inequality. Only nations with surplus generation capacity, robust nuclear resources, or the political will to ignore climate goals and burn fossil fuels will be able to host the physical infrastructure of this artificial superintelligence. The race for artificial intelligence has recreated a dynamic similar to the Cold War, but much more complex because it's not just a commercial dispute between the United States and China. But it's a fight to decide which operating system will organize the economy, security, society, and global power in the 21st century and probably in the 22nd century. And in this competition, as I said, those who are in are already in, those who aren't are already out, but it doesn't end there, because on top of that, those who are in try to interfere with the efforts of the others who are also in the race. An example of this is the United States, which is trying to block Chinese access to advanced chips and critical machines to see if, with that, they can change Chinese behavior and delay or make its progress more costly. But China, even though it's been prevented from accessing the best Western chips and equipment, has managed to respond with forced self-sufficiency. Instead of focusing only on the cutting edge of artificial superintelligence, it is betting on deeply integrating artificial intelligence into its industry, the state, and social control. The case of the Huawei chip shows this, because even under sanctions, China managed to produce a competitive chip using much more expensive and inefficient techniques, accepting an economic loss in order to guarantee strategic sovereignty. The sanctions delayed and made things more expensive, but they did not stop China, which is willing to pay the price for this race. In the military field, China is advancing toward the intelligentization of warfare, using artificial intelligence for command, control, and cognitive warfare. In Europe, the private sector is trying to catch up and keep pace with the main powers, but governments boast about having more regulations on AI compared to other countries. In other words, while the European private sector tries to keep up and stay alive in this competition, European governments are increasingly proud of putting rules and obstacles in the way of their own development. As for Brazil, not only is it not in this race, it's not even watching from the stands, it's listening from outside the stadium on the radio. Some countries like the United Arab Emirates, Russia, India, and other countries from the global south are even trying to escape this dependence by creating sovereign clouds. But they face enormous technical difficulties in avoiding becoming subordinate to one of the two poles, either the Chinese or the American. The central idea is that artificial intelligence has stopped being just a productivity tool and is becoming a new factor of production as fundamental as land, labor, and capital. The big tech companies are not just selling digital services, they are renting out intelligence. Because by controlling the cloud, their own chips, and AI models, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and others have started charging a kind of cognitive rent on everything that runs on their systems. This creates an irreversible lock-in, which is why regulatory agencies in the United States and the United Kingdom are already investigating these partnerships. Because the fear is that a few tech giants will end up controlling the pace of global innovation. In the job market, the impact is direct and harsh. White-collar professions are undergoing a structural disruption. In fields like programming and law, artificial intelligence is eliminating basic tasks that used to train professionals at the beginning of their careers. The result is the end of junior roles, fewer entry points, shortened careers, and a greater concentration of value in a few highly experienced specialists. The traditional ladder of social mobility through technical education is being broken. For the Global South, we're talking about something that has the potential to be a kind of digital colonialism. These countries provide data and cheap labor to train models, but remain dependent on the infrastructure and intelligence produced in the Global North. And even if they dig in their heels and refuse to participate by only providing cheap labor, it won't matter that much, because eventually AGI will be able to run without their work. Without stable energy, advanced chips, and their own data centers, these countries remain stuck as AI consumers, paying royalties and losing cultural and decision-making sovereignty. On the strategic level, the artificial intelligence race is rational, even if it's dangerous. States and companies accelerate because not accelerating simply means dying. For countries, slowing down could mean losing military and geopolitical relevance. For companies, it means becoming commercially irrelevant. And this creates a gigantic investment bubble with trillions, even without any return, of course, in the short term. Which brings us then to three possible scenarios. In the first scenario, the world is definitively divided into technological blocks that are incompatible with growth in productivity, but also in inequality. In the second scenario, which I, De Leon, think is more plausible in the short term, physical bottlenecks in energy and chips will halt progress and the bubble bursts and the sector goes into crisis. A concentrated economic and political crisis. The technology sector undergoes a strong correction, billion-dollar investments are cut, and a recession occurs in the artificial intelligence ecosystem. This will spill over into the job market, which will get worse with mass layoffs at big tech companies and fewer opportunities for qualified professionals, making the disappearance of junior or entry-level roles I mentioned even worse. Politically, this means the loss of trillions of dollars, which will increase pressure against technology companies and against the energy consumption of artificial intelligence, fueling populism and heavy regulation, which will set society back and increase authoritarianism. Geopolitically, this shortage makes the dispute between the United States and China even more aggressive, with more sanctions, espionage, and strategic risk. And in the third scenario, which is the most radical, AGI is achieved, and from that point on, we have no way of knowing what will happen. Because we could be talking about a dystopian future or a utopian future. Only God knows. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed the video, not the news, because what people don't understand, I see a lot of politicians, a lot of people talking about AI this and AI that, and honestly, it seems to me that these people still don't understand what AI really is. They are treating artificial intelligence as if it were just a new tool, like an improved PowerPoint, an improved Word, an improved Paint, an improved Photoshop. And no, we're talking here about a disruption, the potential for a civilizational rupture. This is no small thing. And if it's not now, immediately in the next few decades, it will happen at some point in the future. There's no way to escape this. Now, regardless of whether that's in the distant future or not, in the short term, let's say 5 to 10 years as the short term, the fact is either we're going to reach this superintelligence, like the most enthusiastic AI people are saying, and then man, get ready, everything changes. Forget everything you knew before because, don't actually forget since you can't really forget, right? But our paradigms, our perception of reality will change drastically. But even if that doesn't happen, this amazing explosion of intelligence, we're still going to feel the impact of this AI bubble bursting. In other words, what I mean is, the question isn't whether it's going to happen or not, because either it will or it won't. There's no middle ground. And whatever the scenario, big things are coming our way. Unless, right, I said there's no middle ground, but there actually is, if governments decide to slow down, to put the brakes on the speed of the AI race, which, let's be honest, is extremely unlikely. I don't see that happening, right? But that would be the only way for those two scenarios not to happen. Either way, we should get ready because big things are coming in the next few years. And, well guys, we have an update regarding this video here because it was released about a month ago, early, and for the members, as always, members get early access. However, in the meantime, we have some news, okay? Now, in the first half of February, the United States and China signed an agreement after 18 months of secret negotiations. Really secret, okay? Nobody knew, except for the people who were involved there. Why? Because there's a lot of pressure on artificial intelligence, so this agreement could have been sabotaged. Anyway, while I'm talking, I'm going to show you the list of points that were agreed upon in this. And even after it was signed, this agreement between the two countries is still being kept very low-key. Almost nobody is talking about this subject. In other words, they're being swept well under the rug to avoid greater repercussions, because it's a big deal, okay? It's the most important agreement we have. The agreements between the United States and the Soviet Union back in the Cold War when it involved nuclear weapons issues, so it's a big deal. So, I mentioned that there were two possibilities, right? AGI or an AI bubble, or very unlikely the country's slowing down. Yeah, it looks like there is actually a chance that they might slow down this race. At least they realize the damage this can cause, namely that we might start running out of memory, right? In the regular market, just imagine banks, companies that manage power grids, logistics networks, hospital equipment, all without memory to keep running. We're talking about an unprecedented economic disaster in modern society, so don't be fooled. These guys, they're bad, but they're not stupid at all. So, we might have something there. It's too soon to say it's good news, right? But we can have some hope that maybe something positive will happen regarding this. Let's wait and see. And with luck, prices will drop again. It's still too early to celebrate, but let's keep an eye on it, okay? And how do you keep up? By following the World Geopolitics channel, right? Most channels in Brazil just take content in English and bring it here. The World Geopolitics channel doesn't do that. That's why, in addition to the World Geopolitics channel, I also offer versions in English, Spanish, and French. Because the kind of stuff I bring here, you can't even find it in other languages. It's content that I really go after. I go back to the source to study and research to bring it to you, alright? And why can I afford to be so niche, so specific, so unique? Thanks to the members. Unlike most YouTube channels which make their money through views, Geopolitical Mundial is a strange thing because it's completely different in that sense. More than 90% of its revenue comes from the members. Thanks to the members, I have this academic freedom, this creative freedom not to have to chase after clickbait, go viral, pick up the trending topic, and go around talking nonsense. I can do things calmly, bringing truly accurate content to you because I can afford this luxury thanks to the members. So, consider becoming a member. Not only will you be supporting the channel, but you'll also get high-quality content exclusively for members, alright? It helps a lot, and I can maintain this academic and creative freedom for you. Thank you all, I hope you enjoyed it. Finally, we might have some good news. Let's wait and see. And see you in the next video.